Some men carry their whole life in how they sit still. It is a quiet Friday night at a roadside diner in Nevada. A pack of Hell's Angels rolls in loud and drunk. One of them grabs a woman by the shirt and tears it right in front of everyone. The room goes silent. Nobody moves. Across the table, a heavy-set man sets down his spoon. He does not raise his voice. He does not stand fast. He just looks at the man who grabbed her. And that single look stops the whole room cold. What these bikers do not know is that the quiet man sitting there is Steven Seagal. Ex-CIA, Aikido grandmaster, part-time lawman. A man who has broken more wrists than most people have ever met. How far will one torn shirt push a man like that? If you know the story, drop it in the comments. The diner was called Maze. No last name, just Maze. It sat off Highway 93, about 40 miles from anything worth naming. Truckers knew it. Locals knew it. Everyone else drove past it without a second look. On a Friday night, it filled up just enough to feel alive but not enough to feel crowded. The jukebox played something old and quiet. The booths were cracked vinyl, the kind that had held 1,000 conversations and remembered none of them. It was exactly the kind of place where nothing was supposed to happen. Steven Seagal had ordered the gumbo. He was sitting in a corner booth with his wife, Erden. She had a chicken sandwich and a coffee that had already gone cold because they had been talking. That was something people did not always know about him. He could talk. Not the kind of talking that filled a room with noise, but the slow, careful kind. The kind where every sentence meant something. Erden was laughing at something he had said. He looked pleased about that. He was wearing a dark shirt, untucked. His hair was pulled back. He looked like a man who had retired from something important and was doing a reasonable job of enjoying it. Nobody in that diner knew who he was, and that was exactly how he liked it. Then the door opened. They did not knock, of course. Men like this never knock. 8 of them came through the door in a pack, wearing cuts faded from road dust and patched with things that told you everything about where they had been and nothing good about where they were going. The kind of men who entered a room and immediately made the room feel smaller. The jukebox kept playing, but the conversations stopped. Their leader walked ahead of the rest. The others called him Dozer, and once you saw him, the name made sense. He was not especially tall, but he was wide in the way that suggests a man has spent years absorbing damage and deciding it did not bother him. He had a beard that had not been tended to in some time and eyes that moved across the room like he was pricing things. He scanned the booths. He looked at the counter. His eyes stopped at Erden. She did not look up. She was reaching for her coffee, which she knew was cold but was going to drink anyway. Seagal noticed Dozer looking. He took a slow spoonful of his gumbo and said nothing. Dozer said something to the man next to him. They both laughed. It was the kind of laugh designed to be heard. Erden heard it. She set her cup down. She did not look over. Dozer moved closer. He stopped at the edge of their booth and leaned against it like he had been invited. He looked at Erden the way some men look at things they have decided belong to them. Then he made a comment. It was the kind of comment that lands in a room and makes every decent person in it go still. Erden looked up at him then. She did not flinch. She just looked at him the way a woman looks at something she has seen before and is not impressed by. She said very clearly that he should keep moving. Dozer did not keep moving. He reached down and grabbed the collar of her shirt. Not a shove. Not a push. He grabbed the fabric with his fist and he pulled, and the shirt tore at the seam near the collar, and Erden pulled back hard and the sound of it cut through the whole diner like a crack. Every person in that room went completely still. At the counter, 2 older men who came in every Friday had been mid-conversation about something unrelated. One of them, a man named Earl who drove a supply route and had eaten at Maze for 11 years, looked over at the corner booth. He squinted. He had seen the big man in the booth before. He could not place where. The other man, whose name was Gil and who said very little as a general rule, watched the corner booth carefully. He said nothing, but he did not look away. Erden had pulled back from Dozer and was straightening what was left of her collar. Her jaw was tight. She was not crying. She was not afraid. She was furious in the contained, quiet way that is more serious than screaming. Seagal had set down his spoon. He had not slammed it, had not thrown anything, had not raised his voice. He simply set the spoon down on the edge of the bowl with a small, clean click, and then he looked up at Dozer. And here is the thing about that look. It was not angry. It was not threatening, not in the way most people understand threatening. It was more like the look a man gives when he has already made a calculation and is waiting for the other person to catch up. Patient, settled, completely without panic. Dozer saw it and, for just 1/2 of a second, something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear, not yet, but something adjacent to it. A recognition he could not quite name. Then he covered it. He grinned. He told Seagal to relax, called him old, called him soft, said something about sitting back down and finishing his soup. Seagal stood up. Not fast, not with any kind of drama. He just stood. And the booth, the diner, the whole Friday night seemed to shift around that single, unhurried movement. He said something low. His voice did not carry far. Nobody caught all of it. But Dozer stopped grinning. Now here is the thing about Steven Seagal standing up. It did not look like a threat. That was what confused people later when they tried to describe it. They would say things like, he just stood there, or he barely moved. And they were right. He did barely move. But the way he stood, the way his weight settled, the way his hands hung loose at his sides, it communicated something that did not need words. It said that whatever came next, he had already been through a version of it before. And he was still here. Dozer looked at him. Seagal looked back. 2 of the bikers moved up behind Dozer without being asked. That was instinct. Pack instinct. When the leader squares up, the others close in. They were big men. One of them had a scar across his chin that suggested he had come out the other side of something serious. The other cracked his knuckles. Neither of them spoke. Seagal did not look at them. He kept his eyes on Dozer. Erden stood up from the booth. She put her hand on Seagal's arm and said, quietly but clearly, that she wanted to leave, that this was not worth it. She was not scared. She was practical. She had been in enough rooms with him to know what the next 60 seconds looked like, and she was telling him, in the calmest possible way, that she would prefer a different outcome. He did not answer her. Dozer decided that silence was weakness. That was his first mistake. He stepped forward and shoved Seagal in the chest with one open hand. It was not a light shove. It was meant to move him. It was meant to put him back in the booth and end the conversation on Dozer's terms. Seagal did not go back into the booth. What happened next took about 4 seconds and covered very little ground. Dozer's wrist went one way. His body went another. There was no impact sound. No crack. No dramatic crash. Dozer simply folded and went to one knee. His face twisted in the specific expression of a man who is experiencing pain he cannot explain and cannot stop. The whole thing was so quiet and so small in its movements that the 2 men behind him took a full second to understand that their leader was on the floor. That was when the first one rushed in. Seagal turned to meet him. One redirect. One step. The man's own momentum carried him sideways into the edge of a booth, and he sat down hard on the floor looking stunned. The second one came in lower, smarter. Seagal moved offline, caught the arm, applied pressure to the elbow joint. The man stopped moving immediately. He made a short, sharp sound and went still because going still was the only thing that made the pain stop. 3 men down in under 10 seconds. The rest of the gang had not moved. They were standing in a loose group near the door and they were recalculating. This was not what they had expected. This was not the old man folding. This was something else and none of them had a word for it yet. The cook came out from the back. He saw the scene. 3 of his customers on the floor, one holding his wrist, one sitting dazed against a booth. He turned around and went straight back into the kitchen, and the sound of the kitchen door swinging shut was the only sound in the room. Erden picked up her purse. She said in a perfectly level voice that she was going to the car. She looked at Seagal, and then she looked at Dozer on the floor, and then she looked at Seagal again. She said one more time that she wished he would use his words. He said, without looking at her, that he had. She left through the front door. The gang near the entrance parted for her without thinking about it. That was how she carried herself. Like parting was the reasonable thing to do. Seagal reached into his pocket. He pulled out his wallet. He counted out enough cash to cover the meal and a generous amount on top of that, and he set it on the table next to the untouched gumbo bowl. Then he buttoned the middle button of his shirt and he walked to the door. He stopped at the edge of the group near the entrance. They were looking at him. He looked back at each of them, one at a time, slowly. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. He walked out. Dozer was getting up from the floor. His wrist was bad. He could feel it. He flexed his fingers and they responded, but only barely, and the pain ran up to his elbow when he tried to make a fist. He looked at the door. He looked at his men. He pulled out his phone and made a call. He did not say much. He said a name. He said a location. He hung up. Outside, the parking lot was quiet. Erden was already in the car. Seagal walked to the driver's side and got in. He started the engine. The headlights came on. The row of bikes sat in the lot like they were waiting for something. Erden looked out the passenger window. She said maybe that was it. Maybe they would just let it go. Seagal looked at the bikes. He did not answer her. The highway stretched out ahead, dark and empty. He pulled out of the lot and onto the road, and the diner lights shrank in the mirror. The night was still. No headlights behind them. No sound except the engine and the road. Erden leaned back in her seat. Maybe, she said again. Softer this time. He drove. The desert was quiet on both sides. For a long moment it felt like it might actually be over. It was not over. They heard the engines before they saw the lights. Not one engine. Not two. The sound came from behind them on the highway like a low roll of thunder that did not stop. Seagal checked the mirror. Erden turned in her seat. The darkness behind them broke open into a spread of headlights, wide across both lanes, moving fast and organized. Not a chase. A deployment. Erden said his name once. Just once. He already knew. He counted the lights. 12 bikes. Maybe more. This was not Dozer's crew doubling back. This was a different thing entirely. This was a response. Someone had made a call and someone else had answered it, and whoever answered it had brought numbers and had brought them quickly. That meant planning. That meant reach. That meant this particular Friday night in Nevada had just become something Seagal had not fully accounted for. He pressed the accelerator down. The man leading the new group was named Creel. Nobody in the diner had seen him before because he had not been in the diner. He operated differently from Dozer. Where Dozer was loud and physical and ran on ego, Creel was quiet and organized and ran on information. He had spent 8 years doing contract work in places where the paperwork did not exist and the rules changed depending on who was paying. He was not a biker in his heart. He used the club the way some men use a tool. Convenient when you needed it. Easy to put down when you did not. When Dozer called him, Creel had asked one question. He had asked for a description of the man in the booth. Dozer described him. Creel was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was on his way. He did not explain why. He did not need to. In the circles where Creel had worked, Steven Seagal was not a stranger. The name carried specific meaning. It meant you did not send 2 men. It meant you did not improvise. It meant you thought carefully about what outcome you actually wanted before you committed to anything. Creel had thought about it for the 4 minutes it took him to get his men moving. He had decided that reputation was the issue. One man had walked out of a room after putting 3 of their people on the floor and driven away clean. That could not stand. Not in the world Creel operated in. It was not personal. It was structural. On the highway, Seagal took the next exit without signaling. It was a narrow access road that cut into the desert, unpaved, running between 2 low ridges. He killed the headlights. The car moved in near darkness, navigating by the thin light of a quarter moon. Erden braced against the door and said nothing. Behind them, the bike split. He could hear it even without seeing it. Half the engine swung wide, cutting a long arc out into the desert to circle around. The other half took the access road. Slow and deliberate, like they knew he was there and were not in a hurry. That was Creel. Patient pressure. The kind that was harder to outrun than speed. Erden reached into the glove box. She moved things around until she found what she was looking for. It was an old CB radio, the kind that had been sitting in that glove box for so long it had become part of the car. She checked the power. Came on. The display was dim but readable. Seagal told her 3 things about Creel. He said them in the order that mattered. He said Creel was trained, that he was not operating on anger, and that he had numbers enough to be patient. He said it flat, like a man reading a weather report. Erden absorbed it without comment and started working the CB dial. A bike appeared at the junction ahead. It had come around fast, cutting cross-country to box off the road. The rider stopped sideways across the path and killed his engine and sat there. Waiting. Seagal stopped the car. He looked at the rider. He looked in the mirror at the lights coming up the access road behind him. He looked at Erden. She had the CB to her mouth and was calling out on the trucker channel, calm and clear, giving the highway number and the access road marker she had spotted on the way in. He said, "Stay on that." Then he got out of the car. He walked toward the bike at the junction. The rider watched him come. The rider was younger than Dozer, leaner, and held himself like someone who had been in physical confrontations before and had won most of them. He got off the bike. He moved his jacket back on one side. He was showing Seagal something, showing him he had options. It did not take long. The young rider did not get back on his bike. He sat down at the side of the road and stayed there and would continue to stay there for some time. The bike was still running. Seagal did not touch it. He got back in the car. He pulled through the junction and continued down the access road. Behind them, Creel's lights had reached the point where the access road met the junction. They stopped there. Creel looked at his man sitting at the roadside. He looked at the direction the car had gone. He raised his hand and the group went still. Then he smiled, just slightly, and he started moving again. In the car, the CB crackled. A voice came back, deep, unhurried, slightly annoyed at being raised this late. A trucker. He was on Highway 93 heading south. He asked what the situation was. Erden told him enough. He said he could be there in 20 minutes. Seagal looked at the road ahead. Dark. Empty. The desert flat and wide on both sides. 20 minutes, he said quietly. That is a long time. The trucker did not make it in time. Seagal had known that was likely. 20 minutes was an estimate, and estimates in open desert at night are optimistic things. What actually happened was that Creel's men came around both sides of the access road at the 12-minute mark and boxed the car in from the front and the rear simultaneously. Clean. Coordinated. The kind of maneuver you practiced before you needed it. Seagal stopped the car. He sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Erden had the CB in her lap. She had already told the trucker to hold back, that the situation had changed, that he should stay on the highway and wait for her call. She had done that on her own without being asked. That was the kind of woman she was. Seagal looked at her. She looked at him. She did not tell him to use his words this time. She just said, "Be careful." He nodded once. Then he got out of the car and he told her to stay inside and keep the doors locked and keep the radio open. He walked to the front of the car and he stood in the headlights and he waited. Creel came forward from the group. The others stayed back. That was deliberate. Creel wanted this to look like a conversation for as long as possible. He walked with the unhurried ease of a man who believed the outcome was already settled. He stopped about 8 feet from Seagal and looked at him the way you look at something you have been briefed on but are seeing in person for the first time. He said, "You know what this is about?" Seagal said he did. Creel said it did not have to go any further than this conversation. That was technically true the way many things are technically true. He said that what happened in the diner was an embarrassment to people Creel had obligations to, and that those obligations required a response, and that the response did not have to be dramatic if Seagal was willing to be reasonable about it. Seagal listened. He did not interrupt. He did not shift his weight or look at the men behind Creel or do any of the things a nervous man does when he is outnumbered in the dark. He just listened. Creel reached down and pulled back the left side of his jacket. He showed Seagal the holster on his hip. It was empty. He let that land for a moment. Then he said, I do not need it tonight. He said it like a fact, like a courtesy. He was telling Seagal that he was confident enough to come without a weapon, and that his men behind him were the weapon, and that Seagal should understand the geometry of the situation. Seagal looked at the empty holster. He looked at Creel's face. He read both of them the way a man reads something he has read before in a different language. Then he said 4 words. The narrator will tell you exactly what those 4 words were, because they matter. He said, I know your name. That was it. 4 words. Said quietly. No drama in the delivery. Creel went very still. Because those 4 words said by that man in that place meant something specific. They did not mean I know who you are in a general sense. They meant I know your name in the places where your name means something. They meant I know what you have done and where you have done it and who else knows. They meant that whatever happened on this access road tonight would not stay on this access road. Creel made a decision in the next 2 seconds. It was the wrong one. He moved first. He was fast and he was trained, and none of that was in question. What was in question was whether fast and trained was going to be enough, and the answer to that question arrived quickly. Seagal moved offline from the first strike and took Creel's arm at the wrist and the elbow in the same grip and applied a redirection that was so efficient it looked almost gentle. Creel went down on one knee. Seagal held the position. He did not escalate it. He just held it and let Creel understand where he was. Then the others came. Believe me when I tell you it was not a long fight. Fights rarely are when one side knows exactly what it is doing and the other side is discovering that information in real time. They came in groups of 2 and 3, and each time the result was the same. Controlled. Economical. No rage. No performance. Just a man doing something he had spent decades learning to do and doing it at the level you reach after decades. Creel stayed on his knee through all of it. He was watching. By the time it was finished, he had stopped watching like a man who was calculating and started watching like a man who was understanding something for the first time. When it was over, Seagal walked back to the car. Erden was sitting exactly where he had left her. She had the CB in one hand. She had been watching through the windshield. She watched him get in. She handed him a water bottle from the back seat without saying anything. He drank half of it. Then she said it. She said, "Next time, use your words." He said he had. He said, "4 of them." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked out the windshield at the desert and the scattered shapes of men sitting or kneeling on the ground in the dark. She said, "That is technically true." Outside, headlights appeared on the highway. The trucker finally arriving. He pulled onto the access road. He stopped. He sat in his cab for a long moment, looking at the scene in front of him. Then, very slowly, he reversed back onto the highway and drove away south and did not stop. Erden watched his taillights disappear. She said, "I do not blame him." The drive back to the highway was quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. Just the kind of quiet that settles after something large has finished. The desert on both sides was dark and flat and indifferent, the way desert always is. It does not care what happens inside it. It was there before and it will be there after, and it holds no opinions on the matter. Seagal drove at an even speed. Erden had put the CB radio back in the glove box. The heater was on low. Neither of them said anything for the first several miles, and neither of them needed to. That was one of the things about them. They had been together long enough to know that some moments did not need to be filled. Eventually Erden asked him if his hands were all right. He said they were. She looked at them on the wheel for a moment, and then she looked back out the window. She said she believed him, but the way she said it suggested she was filing it away to check again in the morning. About 20 miles down the highway they found a motel. It was the kind that had an office with a single bulb burning and a night clerk who had seen enough of the world to know when not to ask questions. They checked in. They got a room at the end of the row, away from the road. Seagal set the chain on the door out of habit. Erden hung her jacket on the back of the chair and sat on the edge of the bed and took her shoes off one at a time and set them neatly side by side. She said, "You know this is not the last time." He said he knew. She said, "I am not talking about tonight. I mean in general. This kind of thing defines you." He sat down next to her. He thought about that for a moment. He said he was not sure if it found him or if he recognized it when other people walked past it. She said that was a distinction that probably did not matter to the people on the access road. He said that was fair. She lay back. He turned the light off. Outside, the highway was empty and the Nevada sky was doing what Nevada skies do at that hour, which is put on more stars than any reasonable person expects. He did not sleep for a while. That was normal for him after something like this. Not because of anxiety, just because his mind ran a quiet audit. What happened? What could have gone differently? What Creel would do next? He had decided, before they reached the motel, that Creel would do nothing next. Not because he was beaten, because he was smart enough to calculate. And the calculation, now that he had looked Seagal in the eyes and heard for words said quietly in the dark, was going to come out the same way every time. Some debts you decide not to collect. In the morning, the local radio news carried a brief item. Several men had been found on a desert access road off Highway 93. Non-life-threatening injuries across the board. No weapons recovered at the scene. No suspects identified. A sheriff's department spokesperson said the investigation was ongoing. The item lasted about 45 seconds and was followed immediately by a segment about a county fair. Nobody at May's Diner called anyone. The cook, whose name was Terrence and who had been cooking at May's for 6 years, told the one deputy who came by the next day that it had been a quiet night and he had not seen anything unusual. Earl, at the counter, stirred his coffee and agreed it had been a quiet night. Gil said nothing, which was what Gil always said, and the deputy took that as agreement. The waitress, whose name was Sandra and who had been working Fridays at May's for 3 years, had replaced the torn vinyl on the edge of the booth where one of the bikers had hit it. She had done it early that morning before the breakfast crowd. She did not mention it to anyone. By 9 in the morning, Seagal and Erden were back at May's. He had said he wanted to finish his gumbo. She had looked at him for a long moment and then she had put on her jacket and said fine. Sandra recognized them when they walked in. She did not say so. She showed them to the same corner booth, which was available, and she brought coffee without being asked and a menu she did not expect them to need. Seagal ordered the gumbo. Erden ordered toast and more coffee and looked out the window at the parking lot, which was empty except for 2 pickup trucks and a sedan that had not moved since yesterday. The diner filled slowly. Truckers. A family passing through. Earl came in at his regular time and took his regular stool and did not look at the corner booth more than once. Gil did not come in. Gil sometimes did not come in on Saturdays. Seagal ate his gumbo. He finished it, set the spoon down clean in the empty bowl, leaned back. Erden was watching him over her coffee cup. She had a small expression that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. She said, "Worth coming back for?" He said it was exactly what he remembered. She said, "Most things are not." He thought about that. He looked out the window at the parking lot and the highway beyond it and the flat desert beyond that, running out in every direction without apology. He thought about the night before, about Creel on one knee, about the trucker reversing slowly in the dark, about Erden handing him the water bottle without a word, the way she always handed him things without a word, like she had already decided it was necessary before he knew he needed it. He put some cash on the table, a little more than the meal, same as the night before. Some men, he had learned, spend their whole lives waiting to be tested. They rehearse it. They think about it. They build an idea of themselves around the moment they imagine coming. And then when it comes, it is nothing like they expected, and they are nothing like they imagined, and the whole thing is over before they have finished deciding what to do. He had stopped waiting a long time ago, not because he had lost the edge, because he had learned to carry it quietly, to sit still with it, to eat his gumbo and let the evening be an evening until the evening became something else. And when it became something else, to handle it, and come back the next morning and finish the bowl. Erden finished her coffee. She pulled on her jacket. She said, "Same road home?" He left the tip on the table and stood up. He said, "Is there another one?" She smiled at that. "The real kind."